All right, well, thank you everyone for sticking around. It's been a great conference. It's my first time in North Carolina for a few nights. I've always driven through it, but I'm glad I was invited and asked to speak here as well. So this presentation is going to be a little bit different. It's going to talk about the history of Bitcoin from a price perspective and also a speculative perspective, and what might drive Bitcoin adoption, or at least what my work is showing. So this is the price history of Bitcoin. It doesn't go all the way to the end, but that's because exchanges come and go. One of the things we're working on at Braveview Coin is to have like one index, one price from 2010. So this is a chart of Bitstamp that only goes to early 2012. And this is a log scale. So it doesn't look as much as it goes up because it starts around $2 and it goes all the way up to 1,200 where it topped out. We're just going to go through a brief history. We're just going to go start right at the very beginning. Okay, so this actually happened a little bit earlier than 2012, but that's how I have it. So in early 2012, or 2010 even, the US is actually what kicked off the Bitcoin craze. And this was mentioned earlier because specifically it happened because of WikiLeaks. So one of the first applications for Bitcoin was really to fund WikiLeaks. At least that was the first one to hit the news that put everybody on the map. And this is a statement from Satoshi in reference to a man named Amir Taki who said, yeah, bring it on. Let's just use Bitcoin to fund WikiLeaks. And Satoshi famously replied saying, no, don't. It'll bring up more attention. Bitcoin infrastructure is not ready. It may not handle that kind of volume. And initially, WikiLeaks listened. They didn't do it. But then around 6 months later, they had no choice. So in 2011, WikiLeaks decided to accept Bitcoin, otherwise they would no longer exist.
So let me just mention, there is a laser on that. You need to use that.
Okay, yes. I wish I had the time scale on the bottom. Too bad. It's so the next one that kicked it off. Now we're going one more year later. So now we're going to 2013, and Mt. Gox was the only exchange for a while. But this was the emergence of China. This is where the Chinese exchanges come in. And BTC China was actually the first real big exchange out of China. And they immediately picked up volume. It's still debatable how real a lot of the volume is. But when they first came in, it did have significant volume. And that started off another little craze. And it got the price all the way up to 13. I know it's hard to see it in this chart. And then it subsequently fell down to 7. Okay, a little further on, again, Mt. Gox is still going strong, and right around there, around $12, this is early 2013, so a couple of things happened there. One of the things was the halving of the Bitcoin reward, and another thing was that's around the time where people say the Willy bot really started coming into effect. And there's still a lot of speculation on what really happened. But the latest research is showing that it had a significant effect on the price. The Willy bot was one of the reasons why the price was being driven up. But as the price was being driven up, again, speculation feeds on itself. So anything that happens in economics during this time would also feed into this bubble. And one of the major things that happened during that time was a little crisis in Europe. More specifically, in Europe, it was Cyprus. So this was around March 2013. This is where I finally got interested in Bitcoin. I knew about it earlier, but I was always busy with my job over on Wall Street, and you don't really have much time to Google new speculative products. But around that time, that's when I really said, whoa, did their banks just shut down and people actually lose the money in the bank if you had over $100,000? So that really helped drive adoption a little bit because it hit the news. It hit the mainstream media. And that drove the price to about $250, and then it dropped down to about $50. So that was a little mini bubble there. I know a lot of people just like me that were getting involved in Bitcoin on that 250 bubble, and then it immediately fell down to 50. But it recovered. And that little spike over here at 85, this was, anybody want to take a guess what day this is? Silk Road, right. That was the day Silk Road got shut down. And on that day, the price fell from about 120, and the price fell all the way down to 85 in just one day. But it immediately recovered a few days later. But if those of us that were involved, basically all we heard from people is, oh, the Silk Road got shut down, what are you going to use your Bitcoins for? Right? That was basically the joke at the time. Your only reason for having Bitcoins is now gone, Silk Road's shut down. That was the joke. Meanwhile, it was just a bad day, and then it immediately took off, and it started to go up. Again, there are several reasons. People will never really know what exactly drove it up. I know some people claim that it was them, and they were the ones that were manipulating it. Also, the Woolly bot is really going into a zone right here because Mt. Gox is already illiquid. And China. It had a lot to do with China. Now China has many exchanges. Mt. Gox is on the edge of collapse. China is starting to take over. And this is also when the US is shutting down all their markets. There was a couple of exchanges. Charlie Shrem and BitInstant, they're going down. TradeHill, they're going down. Anyone that ran an exchange out of the US, they were basically shutting down around this time in 2013. And the price made it all the way up to about 1,200. It was 1,242 on Mt. Gox. For about 3 hours, the price of a Bitcoin was higher than 1 ounce of gold. And that was the one thing Bitcoin can always claim to. And over here, as we all know, what happened on that bubble. But now let's talk about the after effects. But one more driver that took it up was when Silk Road shut down, obviously a lot of Bitcoins got removed from circulation because the Feds got a hold of them. But another thing was, when people start buying and nobody wants to sell, the price would go up exponentially. The opposite, of course, is also true. When people start selling, but there's nobody really wants to buy, the price would drop a lot. And at this time, there was really no short selling either. It was really hard to do. And that's another reason why things can drop more. But we're not going to get into short selling in this presentation. I'll do that in other ones. Well, let's talk about what happened after. Uh-oh. We're all set. All right. Oh, we have these weird shadows.
Fast forward through all the price fluctuations.
Yeah. All right, here we go. All right, so after we hit the top and the price starts to go down, what we are looking at was several dynamics here. Okay. One of the things I always like to say, look, I was buying into it as well. It was a bubble. It was clear that now, in hindsight, it's clear there was a bubble. But at the time, you don't know where the bubble actually ends. You don't know how high it's going to go because you can't know, right? You can assume that it's going to stop at any point, but you just don't know. So once the price actually started to go down, there's a couple of things that would have kept it going. And if you see on top, I have a slight different formula. There also says supply and demand. Free markets are driven by supply and demand. But in the Bitcoin space, what is supply? What is demand? So in the Bitcoin space, the demand for Bitcoins is actually new users. The supply is not just mined Bitcoins. We all know how many Bitcoins there will be, how many Bitcoins there are. That is priced in. We all know what the physical supply of Bitcoins is. But there's another part of the equation that a lot of people didn't really consider at first. And the supply, which would drive down the price, is merchant adoption. Because most merchants are not going to take the Bitcoin and store it and save it and try to use it up the supply chain. Most of them are going to use BitPay, they're going to use Coinbase, they're going to immediately convert it into cash. So once the price starts to go down and people are sitting on a decent amount of Bitcoins, there's actually a lot of places to spend them at that point. All these merchants are coming on board. And I clearly remember the news that PayPal and Braintree are about to implement Bitcoin. And this was back around September of 2014 or even August 2014. And I ended up in a couple of, arguments with people saying if PayPal starts being a Bitcoin merchant for anyone that uses PayPal is going to be terrible. It'll literally drive the price down to single digits. And it didn't happen. PayPal is not really accepting Bitcoin like that. But if it did, it would have been really bad for the space because then everybody would be using it. There would be no incentive for new people to go out and get it. And they would be selling it. And I was in a debate with other people about just that, saying that Bitcoin price is going to drop regardless because of all these merchants. The price was around 650 at the time, and I really was expecting for it to keep going down for a little while. Now, as far as the price bubble goes, the blue is Bitcoin, only now it's not a logarithmic scale, it's a linear scale. So this is that jump to 250, and this is that jump all the way to 1200. And I have it marked against another asset right here in green. And as you can see, it followed exactly the same pattern, but again, unfortunately my timeline is not visible on the screen. But the time scale on Bitcoin here is about 2 years. The time scale on this other asset right there is about 3 times longer. Anybody want to take a guess what the background asset is? And the vertical scale might help you. The vertical scale is going from around 8 to around 54. So it can't be gold, but silver. Okay? So right here we have it made an early top, which is very similar to Bitcoin on the way up. The only difference here is Bitcoin is just doing it way faster. It's just doing it 3 times faster because it can. It's such a quick settling asset. Reaches a peak, then it goes down, goes back up, everyone thinks it's back, and then it keeps going down. So if you just match these guys up, and I had this chart going for like a year, and now we're finally starting to see divergence, which is very interesting. Bitcoin, because it caught up to silver so quick, Bitcoin is now starting to turn when silver hasn't, and silver is but my expectation is that silver is going to go down to around $12 to $10. I don't think the bottom in silver is in, but we will talk about whether the bottom in Bitcoin is in. And here is the general chart of what a bubble looks like. And the question is, where on this chart are we? This is the mania phase, and then you have this initial fall, goes back up, everyone thinks everything is back to normal, and then the real crash happens. So we have the stealth phase, awareness phase, the mania phase, and then the blow off top. Who here thinks that Bitcoin has had its mania phase yet? All right, that's an interesting question. So when you ask people, well, where on this chart is Bitcoin? And the funniest answer I got immediately was, well, it's all the way on the left. You still don't see it yet. Okay? So it's possible that an asset can go through several bubbles. Okay? So right now, Bitcoin is clearly in a bit of a divergence. It happened right here very early in the year, and now it's happening again. It looks to be a little bit bigger. So if we are diverging and this begins to reverse, you can probably use Bitcoin as now the leader of what silver and gold will do in the near future. Okay. So there's also a lot of trader-driven volatility. This is where now you can short, you can actually profit from Bitcoin going down. That was very difficult to do back in 2013. In 2014, you could. Now, the way most bubbles end is on short covering. Now, it's questionable whether this short covering happened right here or not. I did an interview called Anarchast with Jeff Berwick. I did it in mid-January. And this happened in very early January when we hit the low for the year. That happened around the first week of January. I did my interview somewhere around this area. And one of the things I said in the interview, and you can Google it if you Google my name on YouTube, was the price hit my target of around low to mid 100s. That was my target. My target was around 150, but it didn't hit my time target. My time target was mid-June for when I expected this. And I was saying that back there, which I'm actually going to get into it on the slides. So because we hit the price target but not the time target, I was actually, this made me really, really nervous thinking that this may not be the low. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So let's quickly talk about forecasting and trying to predict where Bitcoin's going to go. So again, this is not something that a lot of people are doing it. Why you right, and I don't claim to be right on everything at all, and I'm wrong pretty often as well, but for a trader, you don't need to be right all the time. And there's a few people that I really follow and I really respect in the space of trying to predict what the future is going to be. One of them at the top of my list, his name is Martin Armstrong, and this is from a documentary that was released this year about his work. And he was actually able to predict a lot of things very, very accurately, in fact, too accurately. And in the documentary, he talks about how he built a code that's basically able to predict when economies and currencies would rise and fall. And he spent, I think, 7 years in prison for contempt of court, holds the Guinness Book of World Records, because the judge kept demanding the source code and he just kept saying no. Built it himself, so he's not giving it up. And some of the things that he's written, he started in the early 80s, late 70s, and this is one of the reasons, because I went back, I read a lot of his work, and I'm just going to read this out loud real quick and everybody can follow. It says, the global economy will become increasingly more unstable and reflect much higher degrees of volatility, as historically has always taken place under floating exchange rate systems. In the end game, the global economy will be attracted to the next major sovereign debt crisis that should appear going into 26 years after the 1985 birth of the G5, which is leading into 2011, and perhaps culminate in a new global monetary system by 2016. Okay, this was written back in 1985 or 86. There's a copyright right there. Okay, so obviously he wasn't predicting Bitcoin. He still is a little skeptical of Bitcoin. What he was talking about is the global currencies. And you hear this now with the IMF trying to push their SDRs. The whole world is talking about a new global reserve currency, and it's coming right into this year of 2016. Some of the other things he has projected, this is actually, this was the last conference that he did before the whole criminal case. And these were some of his predictions in an outlook slide at that conference. In 98, Russia would collapse. 99, you get an oil low. 2000 would be a tech bubble. 2007, you'll have a real estate bubble. And 2009, 2011 is the start of the debt crisis. So this is one of the reasons why I actually really like his work. And on his blog, he would show you, he was big on time analysis and cycle analysis. So basically everything that happened before would repeat on the same time scale, and he focuses on time more than he focuses on price, but he does both. So the fall of Rome took, I think this is a 309-year cycle, and that's how long it took for the fall of Rome, and it went through certain periods. And the United States is going through exactly the same cycle. And the final wave of the cycle would be ending in 2032, but we are now coming up on one of the peaks. And each one of these waves had its own technological revolution with it, and then eventually you get a deflationary crash at the end. This is 1981, this is where gold topped. And over here you have 1929, where we all know the famous Great Depression, the stock market crash. And zooming in on the current cycle, we're going right here to this cycle, and I'm just going to go to the next slide that actually pinpoints the dates. Now these dates were all around. I mean, he's been showing, these dates haven't changed in his work in the last 20, 30 years. So this date 2007 was always there, and this date 2015, 75 was always there, and that's the one that we're approaching right now. And specifically, that culminates to October 1st of this year, and that's going to be the start of the sovereign debt crisis, when governments really start to have serious problems with their debt. So where is the problem going to start? And that's the big question. So of course the problem is going to start with Greece when their banks get shut down. Wait a minute, that happened already, right? I'm sorry, I've been doing this presentation since January, and I used to love saying that, and now it's so hard because it already happened. So that's exactly what I was saying. I specifically did not, I left the zooming in on the Greece part because if there are videos from my other presentations, that's exactly what I was saying. that the Greece banking system would shut down. But Greeks will not be the drivers of Bitcoin, because once your banks are shut down, the last thing you're going to care about is Bitcoin. Okay? But people in Italy will care, because they're probably next. This is not going to end. I mean, all of Europe's in trouble. It's Italy, and if it's not Italy, it's Spain and Portugal. I still think it's going to be Italy next. So right now, if you're running an ATM business, a Bitcoin ATM business, you move to Italy and you keep a truck nearby, because once the Italian bank shut down, take those ATMs and we'll run over to Spain. And you might want to keep the ignition on those trucks, because the drivers will be the next set of European countries. That's probably where it's going to start, and it's slowly going to migrate. Because I was working in finance, I remember when Cyprus shut down bank accounts, and I'm working with all the PhD Wall Street guys, and I'm literally in arguments with them, because their argument is, oh, it's Cyprus, it's not going to happen here. That's pretty much what they all say. Well, it's not going to happen to us. It will. It's just going to happen later. And if anyone thinks that Spain or Germany, if they're safe, they're not. France and Germany, they're in the same trouble as the rest of Europe. So what happens when things start to fail and government debt starts to collapse? Generally, historically speaking, even though no one alive has really seen this, people move. We're seeing it on small scales, but we haven't seen it on a mass scale. So I just thought this was a cool slide. People aren't actually going to move from France to the UK, because the UK is in the same boat as France and the US. So that's not going to be a very useful migration. But those that know a little bit about France recently, when they raised their income tax to 80%, one of their famous actors, Gerard Depardieu, what country did he run away to? Russia. So he eventually went to Russia, and I think there was one other country that he's like splitting time between the two. Because people that make money in our really useful society, they don't want to be taxed 80%. They want to do something useful with their money. So what happens? Oh man, can't see the last one. So governments, this is what they do. So the reason why people aren't going to really move to London is because this is what's happening. You have politicians that can promise something good, but then they come in with other policies. So this is Galloway, and he's running for mayor of London, and I know Max Kaiser is pushing him, and he's got one awesome idea. It's down here at the bottom. He wants to put the entire government budget on the blockchain so everybody sees what they're doing. It's a great idea. I'm not expecting it to happen. I would love it to happen. But look at the rest of this article. He's a left-wing politician, and that worked really well for Syriza in Greece, who promised to get Greece out of the euro, and eventually they took another bailout. So that's pretty much how these things end. But look at some of the policies he's trying to do. He wants to run Uber out of town, completely eliminating competition. And this is the best one. He wants to take away real estate if no one has lived there for a year, because a lot of foreigners, especially Chinese, are coming in, they're buying real estate because they're also trying to move their money. And I believe there was a presentation earlier talking about Zimbabwe and how their hyperinflation went into like that. This is why, because the new government decided to take away real estate. So hyperinflation is a political event. It is not a currency event. The reason why there were they printed so much money. Well, the reason why they printed so much money is because no one believed in that money, and that's because they took away property rights. They basically took away people's rights. When you take away people's rights, people no longer believe in your government. They're no longer going to invest in the country, so your currency goes to nothing, and that's when you have to print, and then it becomes another cycle. And in order to stop all this, the politicians are really going to put clamps on money. I mean, they don't want money moving around. And heard a great example earlier, Todd, when you said about the horses. There was an incident, I just heard this yesterday. Apparently some guy was running a horse to laundering money. I hate using that term. He was using horses, and now all of a sudden, all horse farms are on the radar. So you're going to love this one. So this is Germany, and this is why Germany is no different. Germany wants to people to completely regulate ancient artifacts and archaeological sites because this is their reasoning. This amendment not only aims to combat illicit traffic and cultural objects in Germany, but at limiting ways of funding of terror organizations that are more and more financed by illegal excavations of archaeological sites, as well as by illicit trade and cultural materials. So what they actually think is that people that are financing terrorist organizations, again, I hate using the word terror organizations, I hate using terms that don't have clear definitions, and they actually think they're out there in the middle of Egypt digging archaeological sites and using that to finance things. Now, the reason why this actually happens in reality, and this is a really bad law, it's retroactive, I can't see the bottom, but basically, if you have any kind of valuable in your house with more than $100 of historical value, you need to document it. Where it came from, how it got paid for, basically, so they're just eliminating the entire archaeological market, any kind of value. Because this is something people can use to move their assets. This is something people buy. People buy art, and if you buy a piece of art, you now need to do KYC, you need to know where it came from. And if you can't prove it, you're actually guilty until proven innocent. If you can't prove where the piece of art came from, it's government's. So this is why all of the dealers, all of the art dealers, everybody's going to be leaving Germany. I mean, because you won't be able to do business there. France did something interesting. They basically lowered limits on cash transactions. You can't spend 1,000 euros on anything in cash. Everything now has to be documented. The little thing at the bottom here that unfortunately you can't see, there's always a digital currencies. They're also going to put clamps on digital currencies. So this is out of France. And the US is no different. I don't know if you guys know what Louisiana did. A second-hand dealer shall not enter into any cash transactions and payment for the purchase of junk or used or secondary property. So basically, if you're having a garage sale, you can't accept cash legally. Okay, this is out of Louisiana. It's a law, it passed. Okay, so basically, cash is slowly becoming illegal, so that you really can't do anything with cash. Besides that, again, unfortunately, you can't see the top headline. The New Jersey has an exit tax. So again, governments are seeing this. People are going to move. Well, we can't just have a move. We need money. So if you want to leave New Jersey, you now have to pay an exit tax. And that headline says even officials can't really explain it because they're not really sure how it works. Somebody wrote a big article about that. And taxes in general. I mean, I used Airbnb to book an apartment right down the street. And two things happened. So one, all of a sudden I'm seeing this. And I really thought North Carolina is being very good with taxes. I'm reading all these articles, how North Carolina is lowering taxes. They're getting business in. More businesses want to come and build here because taxes are lower. And my Airbnb bill basically went up by 40 bucks on 220. And these fees from Airbnb are also going up because they have to deal with all these lawsuits from governments and regulation. So all of a sudden, I've been using Airbnb for a long time, and now it's getting very close to a point where it's not even competitive with. It's barely competitive with hotels. The experience is much better, but price-wise, not really. Basically, because of that. And as I went on to Airbnb to book this room, I got hit with you have to agree to a brand new, updated terms of service for Airbnb. And I glanced at this thing, and it is almost 33,000 words. Okay? That took up 55 pages. I pasted it into Microsoft Word, and then I watched Microsoft Word for about a minute, calculating the number of words in this document. Okay? And you can see some of the other documents. The US Constitution was only just under 8,000 words. Okay? And this is just terms of service. This is not even their privacy policy, which was an additional 10,000 words, right? Which you also have to agree to. And this is what's happening. I really thought the EU regulation on the sale of cabbage was 26,000 words was really the prize, but I don't know who actually reads this. Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper was 3,500. Okay, and that's creating a new global currency. And let's talk about the king of legislations. This is actually one law, recently passed somewhat. Anybody want to take a guess at what this? No, something close though, close. Correct. This is the Obamacare. Right. So this is actually 33,000 pages. Okay. So this is what happens, right? I mean, we have regulators, lawyers, governments. They make these laws because just because it's a law, everyone's going to comply with it. But reality doesn't really work that way. Okay. And the last one, and this is really unfortunate that you can't see the bottom. Somebody mentioned it earlier. At the bottom right there, it says, confirm that I am not a resident of Iran, Syria, North Korea, and the state of New York. Okay, this is the website where this is. So let's talk about when people move. And again, it's very unfortunate that you can't see the bottom dates. This right here is the population of Rome. This is what happens when governments have too many laws and they start to infringe on people, and people just move. People literally move. Okay? So in Rome, the population got to about 1.5 million people at around 400 AD. And several things happen. Not really going to get into it, but one of them is it's similar to what might happen here. Again, no one knows the future or what's going to happen. And what happened in Rome was, as you all know, Rome was an empire, and they had a huge military. So they had such a big military that that's where all the pensions were. Because all the other industries were pretty much private, but the military was public. And they kept devaluating the currencies. I don't know if you heard stories. They were clipping their silver coins. They kept devaluating their silver coins. They kept reneging on pension promises to the soldiers. And eventually all the soldiers just came back to Rome because they wanted to get back what they wanted. So in today's world, in America, because now we're the military capital of the world, but the military doesn't take up that much of the promises. But we have a huge public sector. Teachers, all the other government employees, firemen, policemen. You guys remember what happened in Wisconsin when Walker decided to cut all the unions. Now, he smartly did not cut firemen and police because he kind of wanted to stay alive. But you saw what happened with everybody else that basically took over the state house. And if he did decide to cut everybody's pensions, there could have been giant riots there because now the police don't have the incentive to try and keep the peace because they want their piece of the pie too. And that's what happened. So the professor from Duke that spoke yesterday, I did agree with him 100%. When he talked about the US debt isn't that big in proportion compared to others, only at 75% of GDP. But then at the end he said, oh, but all those liabilities at 120 trillion, he's like, it's not a big deal, that's easy to fix. No, it's not. It's actually not easy to fix. Because if you try to fix it, those that feel that the government owes them something are going to try and collect. So it's actually not that simple. And as you look, you see when the population really started to go down, you have that little dip. And once again, I can zoom in on our little, what does a bubble look like? And you get that dip back up, that everything is normal. People are moving back to Rome, and then it goes back down. And the population bottomed out at around 1400 AD. So people were moving out of Rome for 1,000 years. The population went from around 1.5 million all the way down to about 20,000. So that's like a 99% reduction in population. So you can imagine that happening in other countries or cities. Detroit, Chicago. Chicago is about to happen because they're about to just start taxing your internet usage and Netflix. So just like all those companies left New York, I would actually love to see Netflix say, you know what, we don't want to deal with the compliance. No one with the Chicago IP can watch Netflix. And you'll immediately see Chicago change their mind, right? But again, does Netflix have that kind of an incentive to do that? The Bitcoin space kind of does, but I would have loved to see Netflix just say, you know what, we're just going to cut off Chicago. You know, we don't agree with the 9% tax on people just watching Netflix. And when this happens, people need to take their assets. If you're going to move, you're going to take your valuables and you're going to move with them. And the problem today, and this is why a lot of gold bugs are saying gold's going to go back to 20,000, 30,000, gold's going to be the new currency. No, because government has technology too. And you can't just pick up your gold and leave. And if you do pick up your gold and leave, gold isn't very useful. You can't really buy things with it. We have a digital age. Gold was great before electricity, and it was kind of okay with electricity before the internet. Okay? And right now, this is a customs form, and I just took out the country because the country is not very relevant, because pretty soon every country will have this on a customs form saying that you have to declare gold, including jewelry that you have on you. And if it's a little more than the government likes, then you're in trouble. I'm not sure why they have a problem with satellite phones, but again, sometimes you really can't make up a reason for why certain laws come in. And this is the thing with Greece, and I want to thank Josh for pointing this out earlier. So this is just two headlines, and it kind of goes to what I was saying earlier. Well, what happens? People are going to move their app. Bitcoin already has a killer app. It doesn't need another one. Bitcoin's killer app is it's the only asset where when things get tough in your country, and the countries where things are going to get tough is any country that has a high socialist status. And basically, Western Europe and the United States, Canada, basically all these countries are in serious trouble because of all the promises they have given out. And over here in February, you have a headline, why Greece should not switch to Bitcoin. And this is the same website. This is TechCrunch. So this is from February, and this is from August. Bitcoin provider aims to help Greece move their money. Okay? So this is what's actually useful, and this is from a perspective, oh, can Greece adopt Bitcoin as a currency? Who cares? You can use anything as a currency, right? Can Greeks do something to get the hell out of their bad situation, and what can they do to take some of their wealth with them, and what they have with Bitcoin? So I'm going to wrap up, but now let's talk about Bitcoin price and what does all this mean. Okay? So this is an article from August 31st, and this is great because we're at August 15th right now. So this might be the last time before I have to prove what year this was. So this was last year. This was exactly 1 year ago. And I was doing an article based on Martin Armstrong's work, and I decided to use time analysis to see when can Bitcoin bottom out in price and time. And in that article, this is in that article from exactly 1 year ago, and time analysis said that the bottom in Bitcoin the bottom in Bitcoin time-wise should be 6.45 years after Genesis block, after the first Bitcoin came into existence. That works out to 2015.46 because Bitcoin was created, a couple of days into January, and that's June 2015. Again, I was writing this a year in advance. I did not have the onions to put the actual day that this corresponded to, but this corresponded to June 16th of this year. Okay? Now, as June 16th was rolling around, I actually did not think this was going to work, and that was almost to the day, I think June 17th, Bitcoin took off from 230, and it's been going up since. I know it's down to 260, but that was pretty much the day it took off. I'm hoping this stays true. And the reason why this says probably a low is because I've been showing this slide since February of this year, and back then I was saying we're probably going to hit a low over here. Oh, and the next one, based on the time analysis, so I do think we have bottomed, and we should be going up, and we're probably going to hit a top August 2017. This is the same.